The whole town of Cedar Tanks turned out to watch a 19-year-old girl climb down from the Prescott stage with one carpetbag and a folded paper in her glove, and by supper that night, half of them had decided she'd been bought. Nobody said it to her face. They said it the way small towns say things, sideways, over a flour barrel, with their eyes on the door. Camden Verrill sent off for a girl, paid her passage, paid her people, more like. And a woman at the back of the mercantile said the word out loud, the one word, and it went through Cedar Tanks like a match through cheatgrass. Sold. The paper in Elspeth Quiller's glove said something different. It was a work agreement, 1 page, signed twice. Once by a widowed rancher who needed somebody to keep his house and mind his children, and once by her, in ink borrowed from a station agent in Fort Worth. 1 year, $12 a month and found. She had read it 4 times before she signed it. She had been 19 years old for 11 days. And the reason she signed it was standing behind her the whole time she read, nothing. Her father, Wyatt Quiller, had gone peacefully in his sleep the previous autumn, a goat man who'd taught his daughter to read a hillside the way other men read a newspaper, and left her nothing but his knowledge and a debt on a freight bill. Her aunt had a full house and a thin larder. There was no room, no money, and no other door. So she took the door there was. Remember that, because Cedar Tanks never did. Camden Verrill was 34 and looked older, the way men do when they've been carrying a thing alone a while. He met the stage in a clean shirt and a brushed hat, and when he took her carpetbag his hands shook slightly, which he covered by turning fast toward the wagon. "There's 2 of them," he said, as if warning her about weather. 4 years old, twins. "You wrote that." "I wrote it." Folks don't always believe it till they see it. He'd lost his wife 2 winters back. Sylvie Verrill had gone quiet with a fever in February, gone peaceful, in her own bed with her husband's hand in hers, and Camden had come out of that room holding 2 babies and 11,000 acres of trouble. He'd hired 3 women since. The first stayed 9 days. The third never got off the stage at all. She took one look at the country and asked the driver what it cost to keep her seat. The twins were asleep when they got there, side by side on a horsehair sofa, watched over by a neighbor woman named Bertie Nunnally, who had 66 years and no patience left for any of them. "That's Tilly," Bertie said. "That one's Tuck. Tilly talks. Tuck don't much. Don't take it personal." Elspeth knelt by the sofa and did not touch them, and did not say a word. She simply looked. A long time, the way you look at a hillside before you decide what it needs. Tuck opened his eyes first. He studied her with no expression at all, the flat, unbothered stare of a 4-year-old deciding. Then he reached out, took hold of 2 of her fingers, and went back to sleep, still holding them. Bertie Nunnally, who did not cry, went outside and stood by the well a while. Here is the part nobody in Cedar Tanks would have believed. For 4 months, nothing improper happened at all. Camden Verrill slept in the bunkhouse with his foreman, Hoyt Renfrew, and had done since the day he mailed the notice. He said, "Miss Quiller," so consistently that the twins thought it was one word. And Elspeth worked. She scrubbed a house that had gone gray. She learned that Tilly would eat anything green if you called it by a made-up name, and that Tuck talked plenty, just not to grown people, and not until he'd known you 8 weeks. She also learned, because she'd been raised to read ground, that Camden Verrill was going broke. She saw it before he told her. She saw it in the draws. The Verrill Range had good grass once, but the country had been overgrazed in the 80s, and into that bare ground had come the brush, mesquite and catclaw and juniper, drinking the water the grass needed, choking the draws until cattle couldn't get down them to the tanks. 6 sections of the best watered ground had gone to thicket. His cattle were thin. His note at the Yavapai bank was due in March. "Nothing to be done," Camden said when she finally asked. "Man can grub brush by hand at about an acre a week. I've got 4,000 acres of it and 3 hands." "You've got the wrong stock," Elspeth said. He looked up. "Cattle eat grass. They won't touch mesquite till they're starving, and by then it's too late. Goats eat brush first and grass last. Angoras. Turn a herd of Angoras into that draw and they'll open it in 2 seasons and pay you rent while they do it. Mohair clips twice a year, and the mills in Boston will take every pound you send them." She said it fast, the way you say a thing you've been holding a long time. "My father ran 400 head. I sheared my first goat at 6. I know what I'm talking about." Camden Verrill sat back and was quiet so long she thought she'd overstepped her place. "Miss Quiller," he said at last, "if that's true, why has nobody in this valley done it?" "That," said Elspeth, "is a question for whoever runs your Stockmen's Association." Braddock Hale ran the Cedar Tanks Cattle Growers Association and had for 19 years, and at 59, he was the closest thing the valley had to a law. Article 9 of the Association Bylaws, adopted 1874, read in full, "No small stock, sheep nor goats, shall be run upon any range held by a member of this association. Members who broke it lost their brand inspection, their shipping pool, and their standing at the bank." Camden Verrill's note was held by a bank whose president sat 2 chairs from Braddock Hale. Braddock Hale had been a boy of 13 in the Texas Hill Country in 1845 when a transient outfit brought 11,000 head of small stock through his father's range in a drought year and left it bare as a table. His father's cattle were sold for nearly nothing that spring, and his father drove freight for another man after that and never owned anything again, and died some years later in a rented room, quiet in his sleep. Hale had come to Arizona at 22 with $4, built the biggest outfit in Yavapai County, and written Article 9 himself in the front of the association book. It was not a stupid rule. That was the trouble with it. It was a rule made by a boy who had watched something happen and spent 50 years making sure it never happened again. They put it to the association in September. Camden Verrill stood up in the schoolhouse with his hat in his hands and asked for a variance under Article 9. 300 Angora goats in the brush draws of his own deeded ground, fenced, no open range, no members' water. He was voted down 22-3. On the way out, somebody by the door said the word where Elspeth could hear it clearly, the one he bought, and Camden Verrill turned around so fast that Hoyt Renfrew had to put a hand on his chest. "She signed a paper," Camden said, to the whole room, in a voice she'd never heard from him. "Same as I signed a paper. She works for wages, and she can quit Friday, and I'd have no more claim on her than I've got on the moon. Anybody says different in front of me again is going to have a longer evening than he planned on." Then he walked out and stood by the wagon breathing hard. Neither of them said anything for most of the ride home. Halfway there, in the dark, she said, "You could have let it go." "No," said Camden Verrill, "I couldn't." He bought the goats anyway. 300 Angoras trailed in from the hill country in November, and it cost him his shipping pool, his brand inspection, and the last easy sleep he had. Hoyt Renfrew said out loud that it was the dumbest thing he'd seen in 30 years of cow work, and then built the goat pens himself, because that was the kind of man he was. And Elspeth Quiller went to work in earnest. She strung the fence low and tight, because a goat will find the one gap in a mile. She showed them how to move the herd in a bunch through a draw and take it out again before the animals started on the grass, which was the whole trick, the thing Hale's transient outfit had never done. She taught Hoyt Renfrew to read a browse line and built a shearing floor out of packing crates. By February, the first draw was open. You could see clean down it from the ridge, mesquite chewed back to gray sticks, and grass coming up in the light for the first time since 1886. By April, there was mohair, 1,100 pounds of it, white as anything in the world, freighted to Prescott and sold to a Boston mill for more cash money than the Verrill place had seen in 2 years. The note got paid. Got paid by a dead goat man's knowledge in his daughter's hands, and everybody at that bank knew it, and not one of them said so. Somewhere in there, without any date attached, the other thing happened. Tilly said it first, in the ordinary way children say the largest things, with her mouth full. "Mama, Tuck took my spoon." The kitchen went perfectly still. Camden Verrill set down his coffee very carefully, like a man setting down something that might go off. Elspeth did not correct her. She took the spoon out of Tuck's fist, gave it back to his sister, and said, "Ask her next time and she'll hand it over. He's not a thief, he's 4. And Tuck, who talked plenty just not to grown people, said, "Sorry, Mama," and that was that. It was March. Her contract had 4 months to run, and Camden Verrill would go on saying Miss Quiller for another 5, because he was a careful man who had a girl of 19 living in his house on a piece of paper, and would rather have swallowed his own tongue than let one soul say she'd been anything but free to walk. The twins had no such difficulty. They had made their decision in the first week and simply waited for the grown people to catch up. The dry came early in 1892, and by mid-June the country was ready to burn. It burned on the 22nd, from a dry lightning strike on the ridge above Braddock Hale's home ranch, and it came down the mountain at the speed of a running horse. Everybody in the valley turned out. That is the one true thing about that country. They'd vote a man down 22-3 on Tuesday and ride 40 miles to save his barn on Wednesday. Camden and Hoyt, and every hand they had went out with wet sacks and shovels, and the fire ran ahead of them like it was laughing. And then, 2 miles above the Hale headquarters, it hit a strip of ground 800 yards wide where there was no brush at all. There was nothing in it to carry. The mesquite was chewed to the roots. The grass was short and grazed. The fire came into that strip roaring, and came out the other side low and crawling, and the men caught it there and beat it dead in the open by 4 in the morning. Braddock Hale walked that strip at first light, stood in the middle of it a long while, then came back down to where the men sat in the ash drinking coffee and asked whose ground that was. It was his. "It's your sycamore draw," said Hoyt Renfrew, who was too tired to be politic. "Been shut with brush 11 years. She's been running the goats up there at night since April." Hale turned. "Whose goats?" "You know whose goats." "At night." "Well," said Hoyt Renfrew, "you'd have shot 'em in daylight." She had seen it from the ridge in April, 4 miles of unbroken thicket running downhill straight at a man's house like a fuse, and she had told nobody but Hoyt, and had trailed 300 goats up and back in the dark 11 times between April and June, off his water, off his grass, in and out. She had not told Hale, because Hale would have refused, and then the thing would have been about him, and she needed it to be about the draw. When Camden Verrill found out, he sat down on a wagon tailgate and put his hands over his face for a minute, and when he took them away, he laughed once, in a way that had nothing funny in it. "You could have been shot at," he said. "I was careful. You could have been shot at, Elspeth." It was the first time he'd used her name. Braddock Hale came to the Verrill place on the 2nd of July, alone in a black coat in 98 degrees, and stood in the yard until somebody came out. Tilly came out first, because she was 4 and afraid of nothing, and told him her mama was making cake. He said, "Is she?" and something happened in his face. He would not come inside. He stood on the step and told her, in the flat voice of a man reading a bill of sale, about a drought in 1845, and a hillside eaten to the dirt, and a father who never owned anything again. He said he had been wrong about the goats, but not about the reason, and he wanted her to know the difference. "I know the difference," Elspeth said. "You wrote that rule for a boy standing on bare ground. So did my father, only he wrote his the other way. Same boy, different hillside." Hale looked at her a while. "You're 19 years old. 20 in August." He said, and went home. The association met on the 9th of August, and there were more people in that schoolhouse than had ever been in it. Braddock Hale moved to amend Article 9, small stock permitted under fence on deeded ground, under browse line inspection, with a season limit and a written management standard. He read the standard out. It was, word for word, what a girl from the Texas hill country had taught a cow foreman on the back of a shearing floor. Then he said he would step down as president, since a man who'd been wrong 19 years had no business presiding over the correction, and he asked that his name be struck off the front page of the association book. And Elspeth Quiller stood up. She was 20 years old that week, and 16 months in the valley. She said, "Don't strike it." The room got very quiet. That rule kept this range from being eaten to the rock in 1878 and 1884, and everybody in here knows it. And if it had been written a little different, it'd have kept my father's neighbors from going broke too. Mr. Hale wasn't wrong. He was early. She looked around the schoolhouse. Leave his name on it, write the amendment under it, in the same book, and put his father's name at the top of the page, because that's who he wrote it for, and that man ought to get something out of all this. Nobody had ever heard of such a thing. They did it anyway. The front page of that book still reads, in 3 hands across 18 years, a name, a rule, and an amendment. Braddock Hale stayed president another 11 years, ran 400 angoras himself by 1895, and when he went peacefully in his sleep at 81, and left his brand to a boy named Tuck. Camden Verrill asked her in September, badly, in the goat pens, holding a pair of shears. He had waited out the whole first contract and most of a second, because he could not stand the thought of asking a question a girl might feel obliged to answer yes to. He said as much at some length, got tangled in it, and finally said the plain thing. "You could go anywhere. You've got money of your own, and a trade nobody in this territory has got. I want you to know you can go, and I'd rather you didn't." Elspeth Quiller had been waiting on that sentence about a year and a half. They were married in October 1892. Tilly carried the ring in a tobacco tin, and Tuck refused to walk down the aisle and had to be carried by Hoyt Renfrew, who cried and denied it the rest of his life. Braddock Hale gave the bride away, because there was nobody else, and because he'd asked. I am the Tilly in this story. I am 82 years old, and once, in a newspaper, I was called the Angora Queen of Yavapai County, which my brother never let me forget. People used to ask my mother about that first year. Cedar Tanks had a long memory, and a mean one for a while, and there were women in that town who went to their graves believing a rancher bought a girl off a stage in 1891. She never argued with them. She only ever said one thing, the same way every time, and I heard her say it to a reporter from Phoenix when she was 70 and there were 1,100 angoras on that place and a mohair warehouse with our name on it. Nobody sold me and nobody bought me. I signed a paper, in my own hand, for $12 a month, and I'll tell you what I got for it, since you asked. 2 children who called me mama before anybody had to explain it to them, and a man who waited a year and a half to ask me a question because he was afraid I'd feel obliged to say yes. Then she'd generally add, because she couldn't help herself, and 4,000 acres of brush. Don't leave out the brush. That was the hard part.